right, well, turn in your Bibles to Mark chapter 5. We're going to get there much later into the message, but let me start out with a little bit about me. So I'm originally from Cincinnati. Whoop, hey, hoo day, all the things, however you want to say it. Taylor Swift weekend, I don't know, like whatever you want to call it. So, but I also graduated from Auburn University. So, do I have any war? Thank you. We don't accept the Roll Tides around here. So, if that is you, you are free to go if you would like. But so I grew up again in Cincinnati with great parents, two brothers. I believe we have a picture of young Tiffany, a couple of them up there. Little Tiff. Praise Jesus for growth. Now, fast forward to now, and I have a lovely family of my own. So I have that fine man who was just on this stage, Miko Coleman, and Miko Jr., that is my bonus son. He is in Charlotte. Hey, Miko Jr. And, but, you know, there's more. So we have another picture, and that is... that is baby Zion. So he will be making an appearance sometime this fall. So, you know, I feel like he's excited. He's already a star on the screen and such. So that is my little family. And I have a great expansion of that. But, you know, God has done a lot. But if you are taking notes today, which I highly encourage you all, the title of today's message is Trusting God Was Always the Answer. So I'm going to take you on a little journey through my life, which has had many ups and downs. And I want to talk about different types of people. You know how there's people who take safe risk. They maybe look at the data. They get other people's opinion. Before they make a decision, they really assess the situation. I was the opposite. So I was the type who... yeah, I might hear you tell me not to do something. I might see the data. I might see like, ooh, that worked out poorly for them. But I would say, well, still going to do it myself. And I was just a risk taker. I was always very curious. I always wanted to find out for myself. And this led to a lot of really sneaky and devious behavior. I remember when I was 5 years old, I had real klepto vibes. And I wanted Snickers bars when we would go to the grocery store. So started at age 5 or so, I knew my mom, you know, probably wouldn't buy me that huge king-size Snickers bar. So I started stealing them. And I got a little baby rush over the years. Like, I've always been a foodie. I think that's where it started. But as the years went on, this really led to one risk after another. I know we laugh at like little 5-year-old Tiffany that we saw on the screen stealing Snickers bars, but it really started a pattern over the years. I left the klepto stuff alone, but I escalated to a lot of other things. I began taking drugs of many different types around age 15, 16. I started hanging out with well-grown adults who had none of my good in their mind. And if I got caught with the things that I was doing, I would change for a little bit, but I would fall right back into the habit. And by the time I got to college, I was a heavy, heavy partier. That was my thing. That's how people knew me. And my friends and I, we would drink, we would smoke, we would regularly black out as if it was funny. And the next day, people would tell us about ourselves and all the things that happened. And they wouldn't realize that I was blacked out, but that's how often it was occurring. And it got to a point where it was like we would giggle and laugh, like, oh, my goodness, that was so fun. And it's like, how do you know it was fun? You don't even remember it. But that was normal. And I was also very gullible, very, very gullible person that trusted people with my heart and hopped from relationship to relationship and had my heart broken over and over and over again. And the interesting part, though, is I grew up in church. Like, I didn't just start going to church recently. I was in church from the time I can remember. And this was church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. It was all the time. But I was able to say the words that I was a Christian, and everybody knew that I was a Christian, but nothing about my life reflected that at all. And from the outside looking in, you probably would have thought I had a great life. I was successful at work. I bought my first house in my mid-20s. I had a lot of friends. And so it looked like I was living, but really on the inside, I was crumbling and dying at a very fast pace. And I was tired. I was tired of me more than anything. I was tired of being around people, but always feeling empty. I was tired of the mask. I was tired of having to change myself in every environment, pretend I was perfect, but I was really extremely rebellious everywhere else. And it got to a point where I realized that I was chasing after the next thing and was never satisfied. And I never really knew why. And just as I was about to run away to a new city and start a new life, I called out to God in desperation. I really said, God, I'm tired. I'm not happy. My heart keeps getting broken. I need something new. I need a new church. I need you more than anything. And just like God, he already had something up his sleeve. He was already working on like, no, you're not going to leave. You're staying right here. And that's fine because things worked out great. But I ran from him. And I didn't know that I was running from him. I didn't know what having a relationship with him was like. I just knew that I was running from something. And it was clearly him, but he was chasing after me. He was chasing after my heart. And a few months later, he coordinated my path with someone who had just moved here to help launch this church. I was curious. I went to the pre-launch events, and I started to see something different. I started to see people who, well, before, I would look at Christians and say, I could never be that perfect. And I will never forget, I didn't know what grace looked like, but I'll never forget, I said to myself, I'll never be that perfect, so I guess I'm just going to hell. And I was willing to settle for that life. And it burns my ears and it hurts my heart to say that out loud, but that's literally what I said in my head. But then I got to this church and I saw something different. I heard about something different. And when we would worship at these pre-launch parties, or we were meeting every Sunday beforehand at the Marriott in Oakley. And I started hearing songs that were just like about desperation and about how good God was. And I would break down crying and had no idea why. And then we would talk about how beautiful Jesus' name was and how we trusted him, how he was the only way. And I was so entranced by what I was experiencing. And as the songs continued, and as I continued to come every week, I realized I never knew God to trust him. I never gave him my life. I never trusted him with my life. I didn't trust anybody for that matter, let alone someone I couldn't even see. But my journey of building my relationship with Jesus, I was in, but it was not just upward. So there were many times, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but maybe you gave your life to God and you had to let a lot of stuff go, and you kind of go back, and then you come back to Jesus, and then you go back, and then you come back to Jesus. That was pretty much my pattern. But every time I would go back, I would start to feel guilty, which that's not from God, but I would start to feel guilty, and I would have an eagerness to get back more and more. I would know what the answer was. I would know exactly where I needed to be. And so eventually, God changed my heart so much that I had zero desire really for all of the things that I had been doing before. It felt weird to be around some of the people that I was around. I didn't relate anymore. I was different. I was changing. And I would look in the mirror and I would just say, like, oh my goodness, I'm different. And I felt good and I felt genuine, but it was still hard because you still have people pulling you in this direction. You still have things pulling you in this direction. You have your mind pulling you in that direction. But I got closer to him and heard other people's stories of trust and other people's stories of redemption. And I built more and more trust in him. And I say Mark chapter 5 because there's a story of trust and desperation that I really want us to look at today. You've heard a bit about my story. There's so many different layers to it, but that is the high level. But in Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 25, we hear about the woman with the condition of the bleeding condition, and that's how she was labeled, by her condition. So it says, a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch this robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd." I feel like this is like they're being sarcastic with Jesus, and I find it kind of funny. So they say, "Look at this crowd pressing against you. How can you ask who touched me?" But he gives them the side eye and kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, because, pause, back then, if you were bleeding, you were meant to stay home. You were unclean. If you were in public, you could be killed for that. And if you touched someone else, now they're unclean. So she was scared. She thought she was about to get in trouble for being out in public. But no. She came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Now, I love this story because it points out several different things, which we're going to break down. The first thing, we all deal with waiting seasons where our trust and faith will be tested. So let me just ask you, show of hands, who is in a waiting season, whether it be a week, a month, a day, a year, years? I am. I feel like we're always kind of waiting on something. And when we are waiting on something, she was waiting for 12 years, y'all, 12 years. And when we're waiting, a lot of times we can start to lose faith, we can start to lose trust, and we can stop believing that it will happen. But instead, what she did was go out, and she went towards the person she heard about. And that's my second point. She knew about Jesus from what she heard from others. It's not time for us to be quiet about what God has done in our lives. It is not time for us to sit back and hold it to ourselves. What God has done in our lives, we need to rave about it. And clearly someone did, because this woman was barren, but she still heard about Jesus. And she went running towards him and just wanted to touch his robe, if I could just get there. So if you are holding in some of the things that God has done, other people's faith and miracles depend on it. So I challenge you to speak up about it. The third thing was her desperation for Jesus. Now, there's good desperation and there's bad desperation. My desperation before was to run towards whatever would satisfy whatever I needed. If I needed attention, I knew where to get it. If I needed to feel happy, I would go to alcohol and drugs. If I needed to experience something different, I would go somewhere else. But I never went towards Jesus. This lady knew, she had tried different things. Nothing's working. It only gets worse. That's how my life was. It only got worse. But when I ran after Jesus in desperation, everything changed. And I love the way Miko put this the other day. Her healing was the fruit of desperation when it's done right. So I'm like, they're all like, to your words. But it's true. When you're in a desperate situation, look at what you're looking towards. Look at what you look to get that fulfillment. And 4, her level of faith led to action. So his words said he changed her from her condition to daughter. And his words said, "Your faith has healed you." So make no mistake, the way that you believe and what you do and how you pray and how you trust leads to action. It activates it. It's not just Jesus just choosing what miracles to perform. Like, no, your words matter. How you believe in him matters. And one of my greatest stories of believing and trusting God was with my dating life. So 2 years ago, almost exactly, it was July 25th, 2021, I stood up on stage with this church while we were still at Memorial Hall, and I talked about waiting on God and the importance of it and how he basically took me out the dating game because I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know. And so I basically said, okay, God, this is yours. I've made too many mistakes. This is yours. And at that time, I was single. And I'm being vulnerable with the audience, talking about my experience of dating and failing and just all the things. Boo Thang was in the audience at the time. And who knew we were going to get married by the end of that year? That was July, y'all. We got married by the end of that year. So there's so many stories. There's so many stories that I have of God just touching my life in so many different ways. And that was built on trust. It was built on, I say yes to you, God. I've seen what you've done. I say yes to you. So now I want to tell you about what trust is not. Your trust in God will not come without work. So just like normal, in order for you to trust in people, you typically have to get to know them. You have to experience them. And the best way for you to do that, you can listen to other people's stories all day. You can listen to this. You can listen to Pastor Brian. You can listen to other pastors. But the best way for you to experience it is to get in his word, to know what it says, to believe the truth, to see the pattern. The second thing is trusting God will not come without the enemy's manipulation. So there's going to be periods of worry and fear and doubt, but the more you become rooted in him, the clearer you will recognize who it's from. Worry, fear, and doubt are always from the enemy. And let me just tell you about this week and the week before. So pregnant, as we've talked about, things were going very well. And then all of a sudden, I just started to experience very extreme pains. And I just thought it was normal because they said as you grow, you might experience some things. Well, I didn't know that what I was experiencing was way worse than what I should have been experiencing. So I go to the doctor. They're like, some of your numbers have dropped. We're going to, keep an eye on you. Come back tomorrow. I go back the next day. Things went back up. Great. I go into the next week. My numbers dropped again. The first thing that I did was burst out in tears, crying in the doctor's office, crying on the phone with Miko. I'm crying because I'm like, what if I can't do it? What if something's wrong with me that affects him? And I care for him so much already. And I started to crumble. And then it was, Miko pointed out, words to me. We listened to a sermon that was literally exactly about what we were experiencing. Literally, the lady was talking about how she was pregnant, had pains. They went away. They came back. Then they went away. I was like, it doesn't get any clearer than that. And so it's like we thought about the fact, I'm literally about to preach on the word trust. And the first thing I ran to was worry and fear and doubt. And what if something happens? And oh my goodness, I was tied to an outcome that wasn't even here. And so I literally was couch ridden for days this week. That's why I'm sitting. I can walk now. I'm actually very excited about this, that I can get up and walk because I could not do this earlier in the week. I was waddling around the house, no joke. And I was like, well, God, we got to do something because we have something to talk about on Sunday. And we also need to relieve this fear that I had. And as we watched that message and we talked about it, the more and more it let go. And as it let go, the pain started to fade also. And it was like a miracle just watching it happen. And it was because I believed. I believed and I trusted. And I don't know what my numbers look like. We'll find out this week how they're doing. But what I know is I believe that everything's going to be okay. Yes. And my last point with this is trust is not about God proving himself to us. It's about us believing that he is good. Now, I want you to look at the breadcrumbs in your life. We just sang a song that is so beautiful, and it says, my eyes don't have to see one more reason to believe. Because when I think of how you bless me, how your hand has never left me, you never let me go, you have been so good to me. God, I can't believe you love me, how you love me, what a friend you have been. That is enough. Like he could do nothing else, and that is more than enough. He did the ultimate when he created this world. He did the ultimate when he redeemed us, when he formed us, when he sent Jesus to die on the cross. And so when I look at my life, I can remember a number of times that he's shown me that he's been there. I've watched family members be free from addiction. Almost 2 decades of it. I've watched several family members be healed from different bouts of cancer. He freed me from a path of destruction, lies, drugs, manipulation, all the things. And no matter how many times I put other things over him, he still did not say, you're too far gone. I don't love you. He didn't label me by my sin. He, just like the woman with the bleeding condition, he called her daughter, and that's what he calls me too. And so why not trust him? He has nothing to prove to me. The only person that has something to prove is me. And that is not to God, that is to other people to show them that he is worthy, that he is trustworthy, that he is good, that he is better than anything that we could ever pursue. And so I know many of you in this room trust God. You're maybe walking in freedom. But I also know that there are some who are lost, possibly confused, maybe even depressed, roaming around, not knowing what to do. Maybe you've tried different things. You've tried Jesus before, but life has brought you back to where you are. And if that's you, I want you to know that you are in really good company, because that was absolutely me. And as I mentioned, I've tried all the things that are normal and accepted today that the world says is okay. And I can confidently say they're wrong and it will never satisfy you. And over time, what I learned is the only thing I can trust in this world is to consistently provide me with more reasons as to why we need Jesus. There is nothing more clear. When you look at the news, when you look at what's happening, we need Jesus. There is nothing else that this world shows me than that. And it took me being broken to open myself up to it, being put back together. Just like we sang, though, he wasn't done with me. As you've seen the story or heard about the story, you might have seen it if you knew me back then. But there's been so much progression and so much redemption and so much happiness and so much freedom that came from me trusting in him. And that opened the doors to big faith. And when it opened the doors to big faith, big things started to happen. The world is loud. It's very, very loud. And I say to you, you can listen to the storm. You can trust in other people. You can trust in the world. You can trust in what's happened to you in the past. Or you can trust in the person who has created it all. What makes more sense to you? So I want you all to bow your heads, close your eyes. Ask God, what are you speaking to me right now? What should my response to this message be? Maybe God is speaking to you about getting to know him and trusting in him. Maybe he's telling you to let go, release to him, surrender to him. Maybe you've been looking everywhere but up and you need to try something different. Or most importantly, maybe you've never made the decision to follow Jesus. Maybe you've made that decision in the past, but for whatever reason, you're not following him now. So we want to give you that opportunity today. Whether that's for the first time or all over again. Everyone's eyes are closed. Everyone's heads are bowed. No one is looking. It's never too early. It's never too late. So I'm going to lead you in a simple prayer. And if you want to be included in that prayer, I want you to raise your hand without any hesitation. You know what he's speaking to you. I want you to raise your hand on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I see you all. I see multiple hands. Amen to you. Now I want you to pray this in your heart. Jesus, I need you. I'm sorry that I've lived my life without you. Come live inside of me. Change me. Make me brand new. I surrender my whole life to you. Jesus, today I give you my guilt, my shame, once and for all, and I receive your grace. And I choose to follow you today, Jesus.